turn my video on because of the network issues that's here. I hope that's okay. This is Ishmam. I'll be going as affirmative first. No preferred gender pronouns. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Shirsha. I'll be going as the affirmative second. I might also be doing replies, but I would like to ask if we could change that because my phone's low on batteries, so Ishma might need to switch.
That's fine.
All right, thank you.
And third affirming? Is the third affirming speaker here?
Yeah, my network just gone for a moment. Hi, this is Jumana. I'll be the third affirmative. My pronouns are she or they.
Awesome, thank you. And we'll just go to side negative now, starting with the first negating speaker.
Hello. Hi, my name is Sabella. My gender preferred pronouns is she, her, but if you want to refer to me in your speeches, please just refer to me as leader of opposition. Thank you.
I'll be the second speaker. Preferred gender pronouns, they, them, but would rather you refer to me with my speaking position. And I would also be the reply speaker.
Hi, my name is Beauty. I'll be the third negative speaker. My preferred gender pronouns is she, they, but just refer to me as the speaking position. Thank you.
Awesome. Just before we get underway, I will send timing indications through to the chat at 6 minutes and 8 minutes. And at 8 minutes 30, if you're still speaking at that point, I will turn on my microphone to indicate that you are out of available speaking time, which is both in the interests of conserving time, but also fairness to all participants. Cool. Without further ado then, I invite the first speaker of the affirming team to open the team's case. Here.
Hi, I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
All right, I'll be starting my speech in a few seconds. Really sorry for not being able to turn the video on. Just a second. All right, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, at the very first step, a few clarification, right? We believe that this ban would not apply when you are in any sort of medically fatal condition, right? When medical professionals themselves probably take this decision for you. But what we're doing in this debate is we're taking our this individual freedom of having that choice, right? Why we believe that can happen, that will be later. But furthermore, recognize some pieces of characterization, right? Recognize genetic technology or gene development or genetic engineering has been going on for several years, right? Or for several decades, right? Recognize even under this, the chances of these getting any less expensive has not been seen in so far, right? Because recognize the primary resources of the elements required for genetic technology-based engineering is far research to have, and therefore we believe that this will, even in the future likelihood, when there'll be more and more done, but we believe that this will still be far more expensive, and even if it's successful to a lot of extent, we believe it will still be expensive and therefore inaccessible to a number of people. Right, recognize even then we believe that the negative side might come up and talk about how this will be an extension of any other physical alteration, right? Things like probably any other medicine process or things like probably plastic surgery, right? But we beg to differ. How do we believe this is done, so right? Because in terms of any sort of vaccine and any sort of medicinal experience, right? It removes the negative experiences from an individual. Therefore, all the governments or all the corporation in itself has an active incentive to make it universally accessible, right? But recognize in these sort of cases, the thing that we're talking about, particularly about this genome changing, right? two sort of thing, right? Recognize the scale of it, right? Recognize it changes your inner senses of inner sense of existence, but on the secondary layer themselves, it is irreversible. But thirdly and most importantly, recognize it adds on or enhances on your living experience, or it adds on positive experience to your life. Therefore, we believe the urgency of it is very far less to government, and therefore government or any other corporation themselves will then have far less incentive to make it universally accessible to any other people, right? To believe in that two of these pieces of characterization still exist, why then we believe that state can take away these sort of choices from individual in the very first place, right? Recognize in compared to any other medical treatment, compared to any other scenario, recognize how the first mover advantages work here, right? People who are first going to likely to take these chances or take this genome technique changing technology are probably going to be far more smarter, probably going to have far more optimized physical condition to take on to any other jobs or any other opportunities, right? Therefore, then we believe that all these their lives and all these their enhanced positive experience, therefore, will automatically make other people to a large sort of extent socially coerced to make these choices for themselves, right? We then believe at this point of time, individuals will be incapable of making their own choices for themselves as to they want to opt to this or not, because only by seeing other people's living experience, they'll automatically be taking these choices that as to they have to make this. Right. As exactly at that point of time, we believe the state has the right to stop this systematic coercion for any other individual, and then since state has the right to intervene, state can. But on the secondary level, recognize how we believe that how we prove to you by characterization that this will always likely to be going to expensive because of how simply genetic technology requires that particular number of resources and things like PCR enzyme and whatnot. But recognize secondarily that this expensivity that automatically means less accessibility to a larger extent or to a larger extent of people, but not only less accessibility to this genome editing technology, but less accessibility into other forms of choices as well. Panel, note, how does this probably looks like? This probably looks like you have not having equal access to any other platform. How this probably looks like, right? This probably looks like by automatic lottery of birth if you are poor in the very first place, but you still could be smart and you still could do things on your own merit and you still had a chance at fair shot at life. But at this point of scenario, people who probably have more privileges than you can automatically now also make them smarter as well. Exactly at that point of time, you don't have accessibility into other forms of choice as well. Things like employment, things like having a better shot at life, right? Not only by probably looking prettier and things like that, right? We believe exactly at that point of time, it automatically adds layers of injustice on you. We believe at that point of time, at the status quo, state can take this decision to protect the individuals, right? But even more than that, what are the things do we think why this ban and then justified, right? Let's recognize how in which sort of cases this is going to be used. But before and furthermore on that, we believe when individuals does that, we believe that individuals make this sort of unfair choices that they cannot make. Why do we believe that this is true? Recognize the scale of the changes that happen, right? This is something that changes the core individual traits that you have rather than any physical appearances that you add on. That therefore we believe the emotional attachment, or rather than we believe that the core identity of yourself that you resonate with changes, right? We believe these genetic level changes then to some extent is something that's similar to erasing yourself from existence. We believe that you cannot meaningfully consent to this. Even if you can meaningfully consent to that, you cannot consent to that for your future self, right? We believe exactly at that point of time, we believe that this primarily is an unfair thing. But secondarily, recognize in terms of accessibility and how it shapes the medical world in general. Right? Recognize in terms of accessibility, we show you by our characterization how this is much likely going to be exclusionary for larger extent of people. But even aside from that, in the medicine and research field, recognize how these are largely profit oriented. We can see in terms of big pharmaceuticals. Exactly at that point of time, we believe much and large number of research sourcing and funding are going to likely to be allotted in these cases in terms of many in exchange of in trade of many life-saving diseases, right? These are some things that we can still see in terms of having Ebola, not having Ebola vaccine and whatnot. But even more important than all other things, right? Where it affects the most, right? In terms of the notions of stereotypical racial biases and how it gets reinforced, right? Recognizing principally, recognize how you see yourself or how the racial appearances work, right? Recognize the fact that the traditional racial biases that we have, when more and more people would likely going to opt for something that is more racially optimized for themselves, we will look exactly at that point of scenario. We believe the racial biases that we inherently have automatically gets re-established. We believe this is something that this is also a reason of something that we need to ban this for. But on the secondary level, recognize the practical impact of this, right? We believe that the negative might come up and talk about things like people can have the choices to, people can have probably the choice to how they want to racially appear, and this doesn't change anything because the state has to opt for all the structural problem that comes up with the racial biases, right? We beg to differ. Why do we believe that this will change? Why do we believe that any sort of structural changes in any terms of racial protection are never likely going to happen, right? Why do we believe so? We believe at the very first place, the people who are going to likely to take the advantages of this genome editing technology are people in these minority vulnerable groups who have probably the larger number of economic capital and social capital, right? Exactly at that point of time, we believe when they're going to change, we believe since this is a genetic level change, your emotional attachment and your existential attachment to that particular vulnerability group are going to much more change, right? Rather than any sort of plastic surgery. Exactly at that point of time, we believe your incentive to use this capital or your incentive to redirect this capital to the changes of the structural problem of these racial appearances are much likely going to change, right? Exactly at that point of time, we believe this is particularly very much threatening for minority and vulnerable groups because it takes away the incentive for both that individual from that group and also from the also adds on this layer of incentive to the government that they can say, adds on this layer of incentive to the government that they can say that structural problems are not their concern anymore because people can now simply change their genome structure and what. But aside from that, what distinguishing factor makes it change than any other similar things such as plastic surgery, right? Recognize two layers of things. Recognize the inner attachment of identity you have, but secondarily on the layer, we believe that the irreversible factor, because when you're doing for plastic surgery or any other thing, you can reverse and change back to the thing and you don't have that much emotional attachment. But in our world, we have. Therefore, very proud to do.
Great, I thank them for their speech. I now welcome the first speaker of the negative team. Here.
Hey. Hi, am I loud and clear?
Yes, you are.
Right. Okay, setting my timer. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. On side negative, we draw the line where non-urgent medical conditions such as Down syndrome isn't life-threatening, but it still affects individuals' livelihood. We think that this debate should also include those types of conditions as long as the individuals consent to it. Sure, we do not include the fact their situation that well, the doctor tells me I should do it, then that's compulsory. But in this situation, we're talking about when individuals chose to genetically genetically modify, right? With this would include, for example, editing a genome such as traits, for example, smarter, prettier, having a nice voice to sing. But it also means, for example, genetically caused disease such as Down syndrome, sickle cell, Huntington. Editing genomes also that predispose you to certain mental diseases. And overall, we think that gene editing should include the modification of anything that could increase your quality of life, right? We think with a negative take this burden when they say we're justified to remove negative features. Yes, when traits have negative impact on how individuals live their life, we think that it should be justified as well, because we still fit into their burden, but we better accomplish individuals' livelihood, right? So what do we want as negative? We would not to ban these individuals from editing their genomes, because we think that genomes are something that we cannot change, right? We think it's a birth lottery unless we have this technology. What does that mean? When you are not satisfied with that, you cannot change it for the rest of your life. And the harm is, we think that these traits caused by the genomes is what shapes who you are, right? It shapes your identity. For instance, if I'm a tall girl, I cannot change it, even if it means that I'm ashamed, because since I'm very small, I have to stand in the back of the field, because every time we have a school assembly, that's what people recognize me as, the tall girl, right? This is something, a life that I've never consented to. I'm just born with it, right? We think that this is unfair and would want to give them the option to change their genes and would allow individuals to do it if the technology exists. How we want to do it, for example, is you can only change the genome of yourself, and when you are of legal age, when you are already capable of rationalizing your decision, when your brain are fully developed to weigh in the harms and benefits that this change can bring to you. Now, before going to my substantive, one point of rebuttal really quick. on their point of technology will not be accessible. 3 responses. First, we think this debate should take place on the benevolent status quo because it's whether or not you legalize or ban this. So our burden is to only allow if this technology is to exist, right? But second, we think that it will be accessible. Why? Because when this is developed and people realize that this is a valid choice, that means there is going to be an existing market, right? When there's existing market, there's going to be providers. It's only economy. And we think that third of all, affirmative never explain why it's justified to ban something, why it's not when it's not accessible. We think by allowing it to exist, it pushes for more development to make it more accessible. For example, status quo LASIK was very, very expensive, but now when the market exists and there's more technology, LASIK is becoming more affordable because producers would want to develop more of this to gain more demands, right? Because they give them more profit, right? Now, going to my arguments. First, on the principle of right to self-determination, we think that this should be a human right because it's necessary for humans to live a meaningful life, right? We think that people should look at themselves as their own ends, and not a means to their ends, because they have duty to this world. So what does this mean to have meaningful life? It can mean 2 things. First is daily meaning, right? How you see yourself every day. You look in the mirror. You see yourself, for example, I have a big nose. You see yourself every day, I have a big nose. And also this affects societal perspective. People, as bad as it sounds, but society sometimes generalize you based on your genetic traits, right? And sometimes they bully you for it. If you have a big nose, your heart can break because every time you go to school and then people will just say that, oh, you have a big nose, you're the girl who has a big nose, right? But we think that by understanding the positive and negative feedback, you also weigh, because we are of legal age, right? We think that if you cannot take it anymore, you already rationalize that choice and you want to shift your identity into something that you want. So if, for instance, you want to change, I want to be taller because I want to pursue modeling. I want my contribution to this world as a model because I want for me to be contributive in commercialization. We think it's a valid choice that people can make, right? But second of all, on greater meaning, it's having purpose, motivation to pursue life. We think it's a key factor of well-being because it's important. It's something we strive for as human beings. It's like a lighthouse, right? It gives you hope. It's important because it's the belief that your existence in this world is significant and you can bring value in this world. It is unfair on affirmative side when people are destined to live a certain life. For instance, having myasthenia gravis means that I have to have droopy eyelids for the rest of my life. Or people who have Down syndrome will have to live with that for the rest of my life, and you are just destined to do it. You cannot change it, even with current technology, right? What this does, for instance, is first, you hate your parents for bringing this to you, and that ruins your family relationship, even if it's something they cannot control. But second, you will hate the sense of helplessness that this world brings to me. You will think that it is only your value, and it's to the extent that your value that it limits your value on what you can bring into this world, right? That is very, very harmful. We think on our side, it's okay for humans to change for the better because that decision is based on themselves and how they're going to be looked at as society. They have the right to make that change, right? And we think people will be rational. Why? This is directly clashing on their point of people opting into majority characteristic. People will not change so easily, for instance, because of minority pride. Because if I am Chinese Indonesian, it is a part of my culture, and I want to continue my culture for the next generation. It is part of my identity. Therefore, I will not want to change it. But we think it's still okay if they want to be part of social group. It's still fine if they want to change because they've suffered so much because of the systemic racism and so on and so forth, and they want to get free from that type of harm. We think it's worth it, right? We think that people's choices will not be forced and influenced by society because it will come from the rational decision of the individuals. After all, this is all going to affect their lives. They've already know the consequences because they will not just follow blindly. It's a consequence for the rest of their lives. But even if you are influenced by societal norms, it's okay. Now, brief point on how it will better affect quality of life, we think it is something that is very, very positive, because functional ability can also be changed, right? For instance, if you want to be a pilot, but you have very bad cylinder and even LASIK cannot help you, that's going to hamper your dream. That is the world that affirmative needs to defend, where physical capabilities or even emotional traits that they cannot control. For example, if I have bad anger management that is affected by my genomes, right? That is something that you have to deal with from the rest of their lives, and they might not be happy with that. That's the life that affirmative needs to defend. Very, very proud to post.
Great. I think moving for their speech, I now welcome the second speaker of the affirming team. Here.
Hello, just checking if I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
All right. So, just to put it out there, I'm in a, like, due to my academic necessities, I'm in a really rural area right now. So if you hear some background noises, for example, chickens or crows and stuff like that, just know that I'm really sorry about it, and I'm not in a position where I can do anything about it at this moment. So yeah, I'm really sorry about that. I'll just get my timer ready and then start the speech. So give me like 15 seconds. Starting in 3, 2, 1. So let's just like clear out the issue that they tried to raise with things such as Down syndrome. I think the affirmative model already clarifies on this, because we already tell you that this only takes away individuals' direct choice to like make changes to themselves that are not medical necessities. So already I think it's dealt with that if you have a large scale illness which takes away your ability to enjoy life in the very first place, or can be threatening to a level that it stops you from accessing like life in general, we believe that can still happen under medical conditions. And if you have medical professionals who say that this procedure is okay and probably you need to take it, that is still allowed in our world. So in by no means can they talk about things such as there are some medical necessities which are not life threatening and we need to care about that as well. I think the model already is one which can deal with that and can still provide some sort form of better access to those sort of people in general. Now, so firstly, then what I'll do is I'll engage on that principle and tell you why essentially the argument they make about birth lottery doesn't create any sort of substantial change to the status to our arguments to begin with, right? Because the reason why they say that birth lottery is bad is because people cannot meaningfully consent to it, and therefore they claim that people will now rationally concede to these sort of procedures, and therefore people make these sort of choices on their own accord to begin with, which means their innate mechanism for people to have this form of choice depends on people being able to consent in the very first place. I think if we can prove to you that people cannot consent here too, there is no substantial delta in terms of the principle that applies here, and therefore you might need to consider other utilitarian metrics. And then secondly, I'll show you why on those metrics we still win as well, right? So on consent, recognize that oftentimes when you're this sort of person, when you're talking about changing your genomes for the very first time, oftentimes this means you need to change the way you perceive things or the way you necessarily interact with this world, which means that your inner self, the way you have talks with yourself or the way you conceptualize the world is something that is likely to change as well, because the reason why is you've never had those genes and you don't really know how having those genes are going to impact your life to begin with. What this means is essentially you become a new person who you have never been to before. Since you have never been that person, we don't believe you have epistemic access to what that person thinks or feels like, and therefore you don't really understand that person or the choices that he or they is likely to make. What this means is there is no way for you to meaningfully consent because you don't necessarily know the person you're turning into, and both these persons are different by nature, right? But secondly, even if that's not the case, we've already shown you why oftentimes consenting into this, like going into these forms of procedural changes can often mean you getting a first mover advantage. This looks like you suddenly becoming smarter, and therefore someone who did not go into the procedure and did not become smart suddenly having lot less access to the competition that exists, which means there is a game theory advantage in the first movers that go on to do so, and therefore other people who even though didn't want to would now be coerced to do so, because obviously it's better to be smart, and the people who can have some form of access will automatically choose to do this. What this means is people end up being coerced into this choice even if they don't want to and cannot rationally consent in the very first place. This is the reason why I don't think their mechanism of people will be rationalized, rational and consent exists, and therefore the comparative needs to be one where you need to understand which sort of choice allows people for more utilities. So we concede that BUET lottery is probably bad, but we tell you even on a utilitarian metric, or even in comparison to the amounts of rights and access that people have in our world is likely going to be one which is better. The reason why is oftentimes when you can access these forms of genome changes, this takes away others people access to their some amount of choices as well. Because what we tell you is these sort of procedural changes are often still likely going to be expensive. The only reply they give is no, well, markets exist and therefore automatically prices will go down. I think we've given you better structural analysis as to why that is unlikely going to be the case. This is because oftentimes these are things that only enhance your life experience and not remove bad ones in the very first place, which means government doesn't necessarily have a lot of incentive to create these forms of changes, and this is oftentimes only going to be dependent on the private sector. This is the reason why oftentimes you don't see cosmetic changes being incentivized by the state as a whole, and we believe the same form of things can apply here. So therefore it's unclear why prices go down that drastically. But secondly, we've also told you how equipments and procedures are oftentimes really costly, which means you're the cost of doing the surgery itself is still likely going to be one that takes away a lot of resources. For example, if you're going to have cancer cancer treatment, that is still expensive, even though that has been researched for quite a long time, and a lot of people suffer from cancer to begin with, right? Which means even if the cost goes down to some extent, it's more than likely that it will still be expensive. Therefore a lot of people don't have access to this in the very first place. These people are likely to look like the most vulnerable people who don't have a lot of resources or are in the worst social situations to begin with. The only way they could come out of these sort of sufferings they had is by BUET lottery itself. But this means is even though you are poor, just because the BUET lottery exists, you still might have good brains, or you still might have good looks, which can essentially help you compete in this extremely competitive world and get some access to benefits and whatnot, right? We believe this chance goes away because now someone who is probably has resources more than you, but probably doesn't have all those benefits, can automatically go on and access those due to these forms of surgeries existing. But this means is you, who are the most vulnerable of the vulnerable, get your access to choices taken away, and therefore cannot compete in the same scale that these people can. This often looks like you not being able to get a good job, or you not being able to have the person you wanted to, because someone who had worse looks than you can just get better looks or just get better brains, and therefore take away all your facilities. So we believe in comparison, even if you think about a utilitarian metric, our world is still better because we don't stop people from accessing choices that they had the right to begin with, right? We believe therefore automatically we win this debate, right? But what are the other things that they talk about? They talk about individuals feeling good, but what we've told you is at the cost of individuals feeling good, you reinforce existing racial notions that make other people suffer. So sure, we understand some people having more choices and feeling better about themselves is okay, but what can't happen is these people doing that at the cost of other people, and we believe that is significantly likely to happen if these forms of surgeries exist. This is because oftentimes these sort of profit-driven industries take away resources from other important researchers. What this means is now other people who have more important needs to tend to don't really get those amount of resources and cannot come out of this. For example, you working on AIDS and Ebola and other things that are really important to people, right? But two, this informs existing racial notions of one racial identity or one look being better than the other, which means people who cannot access these looks or don't have the resources gets like suffers like to a huge extent, because these people are stuck in this, it looks for generations, and now states incentive to do this sort of anti-discriminatory work is taken away, because they think it's individuals responsibility and these people can have this automatically done. What this means is our world protects the most vulnerable and minority people, wherein their world forces them into a bad life. So we believe, therefore, this debate clearly goes to the affirmative. Proud to affirm.
Great. I thank members for their speech, and I now welcome the second speaker of the negative team. Here.
I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Okay. Let me set my timer. I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think the burden on affirmative side is to prove if it is cheap and accessible, why would you still ban it? Because this motion stated that they are going to ban individuals from editing their own genomes, which means regardless of price, you are going to still ban it. And so this is, they cannot use this argument because it's not a strong justification. Don't credit this. But regardless, we already engaged, and we tell you why it's accessible. That when there are mass productions, that's when the price can be cheap, because you produce everything massively at the same time when you have a sustainable market. And we already told you why most people, logically speaking, would want to change characteristics that they don't like. So that's why I don't want this accessibility to be so contested throughout the debate, because that's not the main BOP. Second, the second clarification is about them contesting on medical conditions. So I think since the motion is about banning individuals from editing their own genomes, I think it's more about the actor and not whether it's not medical or not. But to prevent deadlock, let's play in their setup that they don't want to debate about medical conditions. Sure, they support changing features that are life-threatening in terms of medical, yet they don't agree with other characteristics that are not life-threatening, but realize that this is using parameter of physical suffering. They don't want to acknowledge that people are also comprised of their mental characteristic, that people can also suffer emotionally because of certain traits that they have. I look in the mirror and I hate my features. I hate that I'm born Chinese, that I have these slanted eyes, that I have these jawbones, that I have these shapes of characteristically Chinese appearances. I never consent for birth lottery, but this is what I got. And that caused me to receive discrimination throughout my childhood, because this race is a minority in my country. Who are you to stop me from changing my facial features? Yes, to some extent, I choose to change because society treatment to me. But it's going to be so hard to change society so that they stop being discriminative. That's why for me to be able to survive and have a meaningful life, can enjoy my life, that's why it's me that needs to change my physical feature, and it's okay. It's much faster after all, because it's the better one for me, and because this is changing our own features. That means the debate also needs to think about consent. Since I already consent to the harm and benefits, then that means the benefits that I get is, for example, after I change my feature into the majority's race, then I would have better quality of life. I would have more friends, better social engagement. Later, when I try to find job, I don't have to worry about racism. I can have a better chance of surviving. So that's why even playing in their scenario, I believe that our team has also engaged as to why even when it is influenced by society, it is still a valid choice, because I'm the one who have to go through all the discrimination and sufferings, and that's why the consent needs to be on individuals to have control as to how they want to shape their life. Now I will go to the rebuttal. The first point is about affirmative, saying that you will become a new person that you don't know, so it's not meaningful. I have two layers of response to this. First, individuals on status quo also doesn't know what the future is, right? Consenting into anything new would never be guaranteed anyways. It is something common for us to change new things, and also that we think it's a mismatch analysis. This choice would weigh the same as other choices in the person's life, because at the end of the day, we still know the consequences of our actions actions, we still know the impact, and that's why we should be the one to make the choices. But I think although it's something new, for example, that I become a new person, I would still know myself, because it would be just certain traits, right? For example, maybe I used to be slow in memorizing, but I genetically changed it so that I can remember everything easily. It doesn't mean that I would become a new person. It means that I think my life has become easier. I think it's the same as using any tool or any help in whatever sense. So it's the same. Second rebuttal is them saying that, but this give the unfair advantages to people who use this that will be more better than people who don't use this. I think if they want to talk about advantages, it exists worse on their side of the house. In status quo, some people are born geniuses. They don't have to study. I have a friend that never study for an exam, sleeps a lot at class, yet is a straight A student, all because of this birth lottery I never consent in the first place. So if I can change to be genetically also smart, for example, then I would have a better chance of competing for with other people. So that's why unfair advantages can instead be solved on our side of the house. Now, let's go to the extension. My extension will talk about societal impact. After this is allowed, that people realize, oh, I have this option to change my genetically expressed trait. Then that means people are going to base this on this ideal version of themselves, right? Of what they know. I think it's okay, because right now these genes makes individual have predisposition they cannot change, that no matter how hard you put the effort to learn something, if there is a genetic predisposition for you to have not a good coordination, for example, then it's going to be so hard for you to success that. If ever, you would struggle a lot. And that's why it's okay to go through the ideal version of yourself, because you know yourself better than anyone, I think. Knowing that it's going to be harder to change society, or even assuming it's possible, it will take such a long time. And during that time, people would still be suffering. And the affirmative never has any alternative mechanism why you could make their lives better. Once people think and describe themselves based on their ideal version of themselves, I think that means they would have this confidence, this newfound confidence, and also sense of autonomy, that I could become the version that I like. I think this is especially important because you cannot talk about things like, oh, journey, you need to work hard to attain that, because we are talking about something they cannot change. I think this will be very, very freeing for individuals, and society will understand that genes should not be a limitation as to what kind of person you should be. More dreams are becoming accessible, more things can be achieved by ordinary people. I think that's when our society can also advance much faster into a civilization that have so much advanced technology. And that's also mean that when more people are allowed to change their features, I think even though some of it goes against societal norms, it's still good that if people just feel like they want to be who they are, although it's against societal norms, sure it's good if they feel like my culture is more important than any discrimination or bad treatment I receive, so it's okay for me. I think we also respect people's decision. So on our side of the house, what matters more is more on that people can choose the better for themselves. And I already told you why, even if it's influenced by society, it's still okay, because you give them this sense of autonomy and control over their lives. It makes them feel like this is much more meaningful when they, for example, are able to change their these traits where they look certain way, or these traits where they have certain certain abilities, then it will make them be able to explore their lives and have more opportunities on their upcoming career. They can develop themselves better. And so when this creates benefits to the people themselves, I don't see why we need to ban this, because there is nothing wrong with essentially changing what we don't like. To oppose. Thank you.
Great. I thank members for their speech. I now welcome the third speaker of the affirming team. Here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, and also I am also by side of a road, so for the background noises, I'm extremely sorry. Give me 5 seconds. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel. Let's normalize having big nose or being tall, because being any of this doesn't make you any less of a human than any other human being existing on the earth. Secondarily, but on genome editing, where it diminishes your individual values and reinforces the societal ideals values on you. This is when your individual values, and this is when the values that stem from your culture, your racial appearances, and your ethnicity gets diminished, because by the dint of their own speeches, the only standard thing that you can be is to being close to being a white person can be, and they just assume that all other problems stem from this kind of racial appearance, and this will just go away. Not panel, they cannot fear that. They have to prove to us how now looking less Chinese or looking less like South Asian in general will diminish all the existing problems, because the person that you are also stems from the culture you came from, what your parents are, which country you're born into. That means even if you are Americanized by learning their languages in the status quo, or being like, looking like themselves in the job market or in the high school, still they, as your friend or as your colleagues, know where you come from, which is your ethnicity is, and all the other things to begin with. That means, and what languages speak to, that means all the things that they are talking about doesn't come from, it reinforces, because now you have changed your appearance, you have become a less of an ethnic person that you are, but still the same amount of problem exists. That means the mental barrier they're talking about gets reinforced, gets worsened, because you have you have tried to denounce a part of your ethnicity, a part of your culture, a part of yourself, but you're still facing the same problems after all these monies, after all this time, etc. That means in their best case scenario, where racial abuses get stopped or racial abuses get minimized, these are the things, the problems just don't magically vanish, and they cannot fear us without proving them. And the negative third speaker cannot just bring any more substantiative to prove that. But the secondary thing, what are the things that first come up? They come up and try to pose a burden onto us by saying we have to defend should the tech exist or not. Note panel, the tech exists. We literally do not have to ban the existence of it. That means the government can use it, the professional does it. And Ishmam gives us structural layers analysis that why in which instances we give you. That means the example of Down syndrome and any other medical necessary where the medical personnel gives you this kind of things to begin with and gives you their professional advices, and it leaves you to live a better life which you otherwise could not access, like what we perceive as quote unquote normal in today's society. I think these are necessarily medical conditions which gets dealt with in our side of the world. So these things are clear. So let's deal with the principle and how we win on the principle, right? The way they deal with the 3 layers analysis of principle is just saying, we have right to self-determine. But note panel that then the analysis came up under this very example of this very principle was like what other people feel about you, what your high school feel about you having a big nose, for God's sake, or being tall than the average human being in that particular high school to begin with. That means their right to self-determine literally are based on some bunch other 16 or 18 or 20 years old. That means what other people feel about you. That means what society feels about you. That means their side to self-determine is determined by what society tells you. That is literally the characterization of Ishmam's third principle, or Ishmam's third layer of our principle. That is to say how it reinforces what society tells you to do, and you cannot meaningfully consent because you are just doing it to please society and to not be called by society other kind of names that they call you in the status quo. That means their right to self-determine argument never really get paused or never really get established in this debate, right? But secondarily, how they deals with have an internal tension. The first speaker comes and talk to you about in response of Ishmam's argument, like, look, I would not change my social appearance because I would further want to, further my race, etc., etc. But secondarily, the second speaker talked about how they hate their Asian features and want to change this. No, there is an internal change to it. So what is the truth, right? Because if we see first characterization of the truth, this initially breaks down their own necessity. That is to say, if school bullies tells you you have a big nose or you are tall, that means you have a bad quality, and this incites you to change your own social your own physical features or your own features to begin with. That means the racial slurs that you face, the discrimination you face because of your race are significantly over. That means you will be incentivized to change in that status quo where we do not ban this kind of thing to begin with. That means this change happened. So where is that bad thing like gets reinforced principally, right? Because even if it gets cheap and even if it gets accessible, which was our highest burden in this debate, right? This kind of racial makeups, these kind of qualities are what makes you a human. So the human that you are, the human that you are friends to your family to begin with, which was already came from like Shirsha but never dealt with in the next speaker, right? All of this works to do like, be less violent to other individuals, less violent to other ethnicities, that all of these things have been going on for the last decades or the last century will be diminished because one, the people who have a social capital are also a minority are going to access this kind of things to begin with. That means you're literally reinforcing the thing that this is the stereotype and you have to go out of this kind of thing. This is a very principal injustice to begin with because these people as part of the minority already feel this kind of things. You're reinforcing an additional layer of barrier that you literally have to be other person to be like, go out of this kind of aggressive or unjust system that you are born into, which is called as world, right? That means all of these things, even if it's cheap and accessible, is bad. But the two other principles that we have never get dealt with, like how people cannot meaningfully consent, right? Notice the only thing of engagement is like what other people thinks about you. Exactly that. That means you do not know what your future self or the what future genetic makeup of you think about this kind of things. Secondarily, even in some kind of thing you meaningfully consented, you like dealt with other professionals, you are like did not take what your parents thought about this kind of things, what the society told you to. If you do not like it, this is irreversible. These are the two principles that came from our side of the world that never gets deals with, right? That is on the very layer of principle we win this debate. But secondarily, with like utility, right? Utility, they cannot just come up and fear to assume that this because of market existence, this will be cheap and accessible. They have to give us reasons why that what happens. They tell you, because of the sheer existence of market, this will be accessible. But why, like things like plastic surgery, which are far less like invasive than this kind of genetic technology, are still not accessible for the most people in the world. They never answered you, right? But we have structural reasons behind it. One, exclusivity and costly. Because a lot of money went into it, literally the market and the big farmers have to take this money back into their account. That means they have to provide to the clientele that is exclusive. They have active incentive to make it exclusionary. Secondly, the people who are going to access it do not want like all other people to become smarter than they are. They also have an active incentive to make it inaccessible as possible. That is why this, even if the market exists under the most liberal capital system, it is going to be exclusively just as plastic surgeries are. That means it also has additional like layers of the injustice. Ishmam and Shirsha tells you that how being smarter by using this technology like literally takes away other people's rights of arbitrary choice of happiness and accessing their lives because of the smartness that they were born into. We live in a world which is very unjust. Birth lottery is bad. Let's not worsen it by reinforcing these stereotypes, reinforcing like giving more access to people who are richer and already have a very big and better educational system to begin with. Very proud to be on the right side of this motion.
Great. I thank them for their speech. I now welcome the third speaker of the negative team. Here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Give me a second to catch a drink. Okay. I'm gonna remind my preferred gender pronouns is she, they, but just refer to me as a negative whip. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. whether we would allow individuals to edit their own genes relies on two things, right? First, on how this would actually affect individuals' life, and second of all, on how society actually affects what individuals think they want in their lives. These are the two clashes within my speech today and within this debate, right? But before going into the clashes, let's address the deadlock on accessibility, because this is one of affirmative's biggest harms, that not all individuals can access this. That's why we have to ban it, right? We have already told you in this debate that first, accessibility can only be achieved when it's not banned, right? When it is actually legal, when companies can reproduce this, make it a wider reproduction, and when they can bring alternatives that are definitely cheaper. Means that this accessibility, even if accessibility is a clash, it can only be won by the negative bench. But second of all, we've also already told you that when that there is no justification coming from the affirmative side why it's okay to ban something due to inaccessibility. This has been questioned by my first negative, but has never been responded. We think plastic surgery in status quo is expensive, but it is still legal on status quo, right? Why then the question of when it is actually cheap and accessible in society, why should it still be banned on their side of the house? This is something that they have never addressed. So we think that they have never fulfilled their main burden anyways, right? So when I've already proved to you that first, accessibility isn't necessarily part of this debate, but second of all, even in this existing clash that the affirmative burden onto themselves, we think that only negative team is able to take this clash. We are able to tell you why then we're still standing strongest in this debate, right? First clash on how individuals' lives are affected, right? If we can prove to you that, with this kind of existing facility, when individuals are able to genetically modify certain traits in their life, we think that and their lives are going to be much better with this. Affirmative isn't justified to ban this, and we will take this clash, right? What does affirmative team bring in this clash? Affirmative brings all negative cases whereby if you modify their traits, they will always want to aim for perfection, and they will lose their emotionally attached traits to when they remove to this. I have 4 responses to what they have said, right? First, notice they never tell you why on their side it will be better, right? They never explain to us why status quo is enough. We tell you from the very beginning the harms in status quo, why genetically traits you did not choose to have are burdens we individuals have to face on their side, right? What does this mean? It means on their side, individuals who are never satisfied with birth lottery, with birth traits for things they get from their parents and their grandparents, and when they have the harm still exists on their side, and when they have never brought alternatives, we think that this is an exclusive harm on their side. When we oppose this ban, when we oppose the ban coming from their side, only our side better accomplishes satisfaction of yourself, right? Second thing is that they say individuals always wanting to achieve perfection is harmful. They say people need to learn to be satisfied with themselves. We question onto you then, why perfection is something so harmful, right? When we tell you perfect is a subjective standard anyways, right? My perfect is a tall, skinny girl as opposed being to someone who is overweight in status quo, and someone else's perfect can be someone who is well-filled and well-built with muscles and everything, right? This proves to you that every individual's definition of perfect is a combination of what level do these dozens of traits exist in their lives. When we always want to achieve this better version of ourselves, including to the extent of where we modify our our genetics and our traits and everything, we say it is a good thing when individuals can achieve. We tell you that those harms on their side does not manifest, right? Third thing, when they say that, but perfect in societal norm is harmful, we have told you why then subjective is personal, right? When this kind of standard is personal, right? When their personal level, if their personal level is societal experience, when they think, maybe I'm gonna be happy when I have traditional beauty and traditional intelligence, and that is what makes them satisfied and confident, right? We think that it is still justified anyways, right? And they can only achieve this kind of level of confidence when these facilities exist. That's why we still support for us to legalize it. I think that is exactly what people want, right? When they do not necessarily think that, being different on my own is a good thing, when they think it's much better for them to be part of a bigger group of people, and that's what is making them confident, we still prove to you why that is fair on our side of the house. That's why their harms on societal standards and everything simply is not as harmful as they portray, right? But lastly, when they said that, when it is not urgent, when there are other traits that you have, you can actually use those other traits for confidence. We tell you why, as long as these negative traits exist within our lives, we will never be satisfied with ourselves, even with the other positive traits we have, right? I can be someone who is tall, thick-haired, society calls me beautiful, and people tell me that I am. But as long as I cannot say "or" due to speech genetic issues, and I will never be satisfied with my verbal communication. As long as I am overweight, me being pretty, and other people calling me pretty, I will never be satisfied with my physical self, right? What is this trying to portray, right? This is trying to portray that first, the alternative of affirmative, telling you that you can always remember yourself with positive traits. They are just distraction, and it does not deal with the actual problem. We tell you that these subjective negative traits actually exist and hampers this individual's well-being. But second of all, we tell you that these distractions don't work anyways, right? You will never be confident with your positive traits as long as the negative traits are much stronger, because the negative emotions are much stronger, and then that is why it will always drown out those positive traits. That is why in the end of the day, when we are able to tell you that, oh, when banning this kind of negative, when we're banning this kind of modification, actually makes their lives worse. But if we are able to give you the solution to make their lives better, we are able to take the first class on how we achieve individuals' well-being, right? On to the second question, how society impacts individuals' decision. Yeah, we bite the bullet that society's individuals has a certain norm of what goods and bad traits. But if we can prove to you that A, subjective positive and negative traits will always be stronger than societal norms, but B, even if they do opt into societal norms, it is still something that is okay. We tell you why, then we will take the second class, right? What does affirmative bench bring? I will tell you 4 points and how I will respond to them, right? First thing, they continuously say that, oh, it means only rich people in society can access this. We told you why accessibility is still never part of this debate, and that's why their first point is will not stand in this class, right? But second of all, they tell you on their side, individuals will always opt into societal norms of trait when they want to genetically modify themselves. We tell you that is not true, right? Why? When they already at the age of 18, when you have already lived a part of your life with these certain traits, that is why the mechanism of legal age in our case still stands. They know which traits they like and which one they did not, right? At the age of 21, I can tell that this Chinese pride I have within myself favors me, but genetically traits of myopia from my parents is something I want to remove, right? And definitely, I do not want to opt into societal traits that gives me no meaning or no function. This proves why likelihood of the societal norms on their side does not actually be fulfilled, right? These responses on how individual preferences are still stronger than societal norms, but especially in the age, on the legal age, you're already having confidence within your certain ethnicity or race. We think that is why their case does not stand. But third response, even if they do opt into societal norms, we tell you that it is still okay because you still can get confidence by fitting into society, right? A whole childhood of being sidelined and outcasted. And in their adult life, if they just want to be accepted, we think that confidence on our side is still better manifested. But lastly, they tell you a future life full of new traits is harmful, and everything. We tell you that the future is always unknown, right? We have told you why without these negative traits, these individuals, it significantly helps their life, right? We tell you why then, even if in the future it looks like I am not going to have any Chinese physical features, we tell you why ethnicity and culture is not just about my physical self. It's not just about how people look like. I can still be Chinese even if I don't look like one, but I still practice my cultures. I still do whatever other things I need to achieve. That's why we tell you why it is. If they want to talk about minorities existence, we tell you why other things other than physical appearance can still exist on our side of the house. That's why we take the clash anyways, and we take this overall debate. We proudly oppose. Thank you.
Great. I thank Mem for their speech. That concludes the substantive portion of the debate. I now welcome back the leader of the negative team. Here.
I am audible.
Yes, you are.
Okay, let me set my timer. Oh yeah, I'm also sorry if there are background noises. I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. There are two clashes in this debate. First, on the principle level, whether or not individuals should have the right to modify their own genes. And second clash, we'll talk about whether individuals' lives will be better after they use this technology. Now let's go to the first clash. Affirmative already brought to you that consent never exists because they say people won't be affected by the market. And second, that people should just accept themselves the way they are, even if it's a weakness. How we respond to this first point is that we say that it's fine for consent to be affected by the people around you, because people will do analysis of harm and benefits that will be valid, because when you are of a legal age, you had enough experiences to determine which trait you like and which traits you don't. So there are enough time to make a good decision. They don't have any response to this. They never engage to our points that people will do this analysis of harm and benefits, and also that the analysis that people know themselves better, that regardless of whatever happens, they should choose themselves what kind of harms they want to experience and what kind of benefit they want to experience. So when they go through this procedure, they already think of that. I think that's why the argument of consent still stands at the end of the day. Second point about accepting themselves the way they are, we already told you that even if it's a weakness, I think that people on the principle, we give you analysis that humans should be able to determine their own value and duty in this life, influenced by both daily and greater meaning. Genomes should not limit their contribution to this life. I believe my first speaker already explained this to you. We also respond, the second response that we give is that analysis of that weight of this choice would be the same as other choices, because inherently people have the fundamental ability to know and the consequences of their actions and what it can spiral into. And the third response is that we say that the campaign acceptance of just the way you are is actually denying individuals' capacity to discover the true them, that who they feel, because we don't want people to feel uncomfortable in their own skin. If their true self is against what they look like or their traits, then I think it's fine to change their traits. So that's why this point have already been responded as well, about accepting themselves even if it's a weakness. Now, second point, about can individuals' lives be better? Like they've already said that the harm would exist. For example, they said although you change your racial appearances, discrimination would still exist. But do realize this is murder on a certain level. There is no process analysis whatsoever why discrimination would still exist. Comparatively, we already explained to you that society right now, unfortunately, is still discriminative. And that's why they value someone in superficial parameter. That's why when we look like we are the majority race, the discrimination will stop. I think this logical sequence is quite simple to be understood, but yet this remain unengaged, and that's why our points and our benefits still exist. Although they say that you shouldn't listen to discriminative society, that we should not be influenced, but we already told you that this is the individuals that experience the harm themselves. They're the ones that live their life. So since they have this first-hand knowledge, this is an informed decision. They wouldn't make reckless consequences, since they are the ones that will have to go through that. So this response show that even if it's influenced by society, it's okay, because individuals are those we need to champion. Not to mention, because we already give you analysis as well, that it will take a long time for normalization of negative traits to happen. That is ideal scenario for society to accept us whoever we are with whatever traits, but it's not what's happening right now. So since they don't provide any analysis why it's likely to happen, or as fast as changing our own genomes, I think during that time of waiting, affirmative side, on affirmative side, more people would suffer. I think our WIP also engaged the second layer. Even if society becomes progressive, it's individuals' perception that will decide how they enjoy their lives. If society accept overweight people, but I myself still feel overweight, I would never be satisfied either. So our harms are also clear, that people would live their life feeling uncomfortable in their own skin, and people wouldn't have a meaningful life. That's why we believe we should win this debate. Thank you.
Great. I thank members for their speech. I now welcome back the leader of the affirming team to conclude the debate. Here.
Hi. So, like, deputy from affirmative would be doing the replies. I hope that's okay.
Great. Thank you.
All right. I'll just get my timer ready. So, like, give me 15-30 seconds at best. Also, sorry for the background noise. Starting in 3, 2, 1. So I think there are broadly like 3 clashes, and I'll show you why we win all of them, right? So firstly on accessibility, secondly on how individuals benefit, and finally on the social impacts that this might have, right? On the first, they tell us that, well, accessibility is something that can only exist when you don't ban this and when you proliferate this. I think by saying this, they don't essentially understand what our stance on this is, right? So it's not that we want to create accessibility for everyone and therefore everyone can do this, because we've shown you structural reasons as to why that is likely going to be like impossible. And we've also given examples of things such as plastic surgery or cosmetic surgery, which still costs a lot, which means some amount of disproportionate access still exists and is likely to exist here as well. What we tell you is rather we'd have no access for anyone, because this doesn't like create social coercion and push people into choices or like harm the existing social racial situation, but instead of having disproportionate access. That is why I think even if we don't have access, this still wins us this clash, because that is essentially what we prefer, right? But secondly, on individual effects, they say that this status quo is still bad and therefore we don't provide any sort of alternative. I don't think the burden on us is to provide any sort of alternatives, because what we tell you, even if there are problems with the status quo, the scale of harm is still likely to go up on their case. Because what we tell you, that even though like birth lottery is bad, it is still the only means of battling against oppression for some people, because that is the only way some people, even though they don't have resources, are poor, might probably have still beneficial traits which helps them sustain in the global world, right? But that goes away in their world, because other people now can just like edit themselves and buy this. We believe therefore the scale of individual harm is likely going to be increased in their world, right? But secondly, they make this claim, well, oh, just because I'm 18 now, I understand everything and therefore my perfect is subjective and I can be my version of that. I think their own analysis goes against this, goes against this, and also it's really counterintuitive, because everything that they tell us is about the social standards and how it pushes people into making certain forms of choices. Because say you are tall, but society tells you being tall is bad and therefore you don't want to be tall anymore. I am not sure why that is going to be subjective, and therefore their whole analysis about me having perception of about myself and feeling okay essentially falls apart, because your perception is based on the social narrative that is established by their own analysis. So if therefore you have better chances of fighting against that social narrative if these forms of like proliferation of like editing genomes is not created. I think we prefer that, because that gives you more chances of perceiving yourself in a better way, right? But secondly, they tell you, even if I opt into societal standards, that is still okay because that allows me to feel better. I think they essentially don't really analyze this to any extent, right? They make the claim that we haven't tell you why discrimination doesn't go away, but Jumana gave you analysis as to how you still have your name and social connections and upbringings, and therefore you're still likely to be identified as who you are, and therefore racial discrimination can still exist. It can be like increased because now they think you want to opt into their racial appearance or you want to opt into those societal benefits, and therefore they might still not accept you. So their like benefits at best are unclear. But we tell you that if that doesn't happen, the problem with their world is you cannot opt out of it, because this is essentially irreversible and you turn into a completely different person. We believe therefore essentially what happens is you make a bad choice and now you're stuck into it forever. We'd rather not take that risk to begin with, right? But finally they say the future is unknown. I think they miss our analysis on this, because it's not that you don't know the future, but essentially you become a different person and therefore can't make choices anymore. This is what makes the choice irreversible to begin with, and therefore you not having epistemic access to that person cannot make choices to begin with. We believe therefore we still win on the principle and practicals as well, because we would want to tell you they make no engagement whatsoever on why societal biases don't get enhanced in our world. We've given you structural reasonings as to why that is likely to happen. So on the utility, we get no engagement, but on the tell you why more people have more access to status quo is coercive situation they create. Very proud to affirm.
Great, thank you to both teams. If you could please leave the meeting, and there will be a link posted in the Discord